ってきた。危ない。
Hello, my name is Luis Antonio, and I want to share with you an anecdote my grandfather, who was a truck driver, once told me. What you're about to hear happened in the 1990s. He worked with his own semi-truck, which he had purchased through a lot of hard work when he first started in the job. But over the years, the truck began to deteriorate and costly problems started appearing. After spending money on repairs almost every 2 months, my grandfather decided to save up for a newer truck in better condition, and he finally managed to get one. A colleague told him about a young man selling his late father's truck for a very cheap price. My grandfather immediately contacted him and ended up buying it. He did have doubts about why it was so cheap, considering it was fairly new at the time and in excellent shape. But the young man simply said he had no place to store it and preferred to sell it quickly. Without asking more questions and feeling very happy, my grandfather began working with his new truck. About a week later, he got a job transporting raw materials. He left in the afternoon, saying goodbye to my grandmother, my father, and my uncles, as it would take a few days before he returned. He was excited because, for once, the truck wouldn't break down during the trip. But things took an unexpected, and very dark, turn. He was driving at nightfall when suddenly everything around him was pitch black and desolate. He was enjoying music on his new radio, volume all the way up, when suddenly, through the rearview mirror, he saw something move behind him, inside the cab. Startled, he quickly turned the volume down and looked back, but saw nothing, so he assumed it was his imagination. He turned the music back up and continued driving. But again, something appeared in the mirror. This time, he saw it clearly, a black silhouette with glowing eyes, sitting on the bunk bed in the back, staring at him. And not through the mirror, it was looking directly at him. Before he could react, his body started to go numb. He couldn't press the accelerator or brake, and his hands wouldn't move the steering wheel. He didn't understand what was happening, terrified not only by the horrible, evil presence behind him, but also by the fact he might crash since he had no control over his own body. Luckily, there were no curves during those few seconds. When he regained movement, he quickly pulled over to the side of the road. Shaken and trembling, he got out of the truck. He didn't know whether to continue or not. He felt he had escaped death by a miracle. Deep down, he knew the numbness was caused by that evil entity in the cab. For an hour, he stood outside in the darkness, debating what to do. Then he heard banging noises coming from inside the cab. He took out a small flashlight and shined it through the passenger side window. What he saw made his blood run cold. There it was, that same terrifying figure, watching him from inside. Desperate, my grandfather tried flagging down passing cars, but no one stopped. At that time, he didn't have a cell phone, so the only way to call for help was through the truck's radio. But he preferred to stay outside all night rather than get back inside with whatever that thing was. At dawn, he gathered the courage to get back in, avoiding looking behind him or at the mirror, and continued driving. He was exhausted from being awake all night but wanted to get as far as possible during daylight to avoid another night on the road. But of course, night fell again. He was a few hours from the next town, where he planned to rest at a motel. As he drove, he noticed movement outside his window, a man riding a horse alongside the road. That wasn't unusual for rural areas back then, but at that hour, in such a remote place, it was odd. Then he realized the horse was galloping at an incredible speed, keeping pace with the truck. His fear returned. And then, he saw the horse turn its head to look directly at him. Its eyes glowed bright red. And it smiled. The rider also turned his head, a human-shaped silhouette with the same glowing eyes as the thing from the night before. My grandfather nearly lost control of the wheel. A car in the opposite lane honked repeatedly. He had drifted into their lane for a few seconds. He managed to correct his course just in time. When he looked again, the horse and rider were gone. Though he wasn't religious, for the first time in his life, he prayed to God, begging to make it to his destination safely and to protect him from whatever evil was after him. Hours later, he reached the town, rented a motel room, and called my grandmother. He told her everything and said that after delivering the goods the next day, he would return home by bus, leaving the truck behind. She agreed his safety was more important than the money they had spent on the truck. When he returned home, he went with his friend to confront the young man who had sold the truck, certain he knew about the evil presence. But they found he had moved out days earlier. A neighbor told them the man's father had been involved in satanic practices, claiming he had made a pact to gain wealth in exchange for his soul after death. The neighbor said all this casually, but for my grandparents, after what had happened, everything made sense. My grandfather left more scared than before, convinced the demons the man's father had summoned were still attached to the truck. Ironically, in trying to get a great deal on a truck, my grandfather had paid the highest price. Those horrifying images haunted him for the rest of his life. Hello Prater, I'm Ernesto, and I want to share with you a truly terrifying experience I had back in my trucker days in the 1990s. I'm a fan of horror, so I decided to share it with the whole community. I worked seasonally. Sometimes I would travel for weeks transporting construction materials from one state to another here in Mexico. On one occasion, I was sent to Jalapa, Veracruz from the capital city, and that's when this incident happened. I was driving my truck as usual when night fell. I was eating the dinner I bought earlier that night from a roadside gas station stand. It was already past 11 p.m. At that time, a section of the highway was under construction, and there was a mandatory detour through a stretch surrounded by forest and trees. Supposedly it was a short detour, but to me it felt endless. I remember there was dense vegetation from the mountains. I was listening to a popular Mexican radio show where people called in to share their paranormal stories. That night's topic was witches, witchcraft, and similar things. I was listening calmly while eating and driving along that dark road through the trees. I was completely alone, no cars ahead of me, none behind. The atmosphere was already unsettling when, suddenly, I heard a loud bang on the trailer, as if something heavy had fallen on it. I hit the brakes immediately, unsure what had caused it, and decided to get out and take a look. I regretted that decision for the rest of my life. When I turned my head upward, I saw the silhouette of what looked like a woman, with long, messy, wild hair. She was dressed in black and crouched on top of the trailer's roof, staring directly at me. Then, I saw her crawl on all fours, hands and feet, across the roof, heading straight toward me. I immediately jumped back into my seat, locked the doors, and stepped on the accelerator as hard as I could, hoping whatever it was would fall or jump off. But instead, the opposite happened. That thing started making animal-like noises. To this day, I can't exactly describe them, but they were sounds so horrifying, so unnatural, that I had never heard anything like them before, nor ever again. It was so terrifying and chilling that all I could do was pray, out loud, so that thing would hear me and leave. But instead, it began to scream, or rather moan, as if in pain. The sound was so eerie and disturbing it made my skin crawl. Suddenly, I heard those screams fading away. I glanced at my side mirror and saw something fly up into the sky, disappearing into the darkness. That woman, or whatever it was, had left. I could swear it flew away the moment I began to pray. I never saw it again. When I finally got out of that stretch of road, I was completely horrified. 5 days later, I returned home, but I wasn't the same. Normally, I would come home happy to see my wife and kids, greeting them warmly and bringing them small gifts. But this time, after greeting my children, I took my wife to our bedroom, hugged her tightly, and broke down crying. Through tears, I told her what had happened that night and that ever since then, I hadn't been able to sleep without nightmares, without dreaming of that witch, because I was certain that's what it had been. It took me a long time to recover. We went to church many times, and I even had the truck blessed. But that's something I will never forget, that figure and the way it moved, almost twisting, while staring at me. It's something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. It was ironic that I had just been listening to stories about witches on that radio show. We don't know if it was just a coincidence or if those energies somehow attracted that thing. We'll never know. But one thing's for sure, coincidences don't exist. This is an experience my grandfather told us about, something that happened to him in 2011, the same year he retired. He had been a truck driver all his life, and he loved his job so much that he still keeps his truck. He never wanted to sell it, saying it had been his companion for many years. Anyway, this happened a few months before his retirement. He says he would have preferred his final trip to be a happier one, not as horrible as the one that took place. He was traveling from Durango to Tamaulipas, making deliveries to a border city before heading back. Night fell as usual. My grandfather, who was just learning to use new technology, was talking to my grandmother on the new cell phone my uncle had given him. He told her he was feeling a little uneasy because a few kilometers back, he had witnessed armed men pulling people out of their vehicle. Of course, neither he nor anyone else could do anything. It would have been like digging their own graves. He was nervous, but my grandmother reassured him over the phone, telling him she was praying for him and that nothing bad would happen. After that, he told her he was going to hang up because he needed to stop for a bathroom break. He pulled over on a stretch of road where you could easily turn off onto a dirt path leading into the woods. Of course, he didn't drive in, he just parked at the edge so he could step into the trees for privacy. He still had a long way to go and didn't know where the next gas station would be, since he rarely drove that route. He got out of the truck and looked for a spot a little deeper into the woods so that passing cars wouldn't see him. Using the flashlight on his new phone, he kept watch for snakes, something he was wary of. While he was minding his business, he suddenly heard it, a faint sobbing sound. It was barely audible over the chorus of crickets, but it was unmistakable. He froze. Then, the sobbing grew, like more people had joined in. The sounds were still faint, but they were unmistakably the cries of people. My grandfather was certain of it. He began fiddling with his phone's light and walked further into the brush, trying to find the source. He thought maybe someone needed help. But he saw absolutely no one. He did notice something strange. In certain spots, there were no branches at all, as if they had been cleared on purpose, and the earth looked freshly disturbed. At that point, he decided he didn't want to know more. He quickly walked back to his truck and drove away. He called my grandmother again to tell her what had just happened. She was deeply unsettled and asked him if he was thinking what she was thinking. He replied, "Yes, maybe there are people buried there, crying out to be heard, knowing their families have no idea that they ended up there." My grandfather came back from that trip with a heavy heart, unable to get those sounds out of his mind, the cries from that patch of woods. This was my grandfather's story, always told with deep respect for all those who lost their lives at the hands of cruel people. We pray for them, that they may be in a better place, with God. From his grandson, Francisco, thank you for listening to his story. Hello, my name is Matt. Back in 2013, I was driving trucks for a company based in Denver, Colorado, and I will never forget what happened to me on a Friday the 13th, September 13th, 2013, to be exact. I was making a trip from Denver to Los Angeles, California. I left around 1 p.m., taking Interstate 70. I remember there was an accident along the way, which caused a slight delay in my trip. I arrived just before midnight in the city of St. George. I got off Interstate 15 to head to a truck stop, but it was already too late to find a single available parking spot. Then I remembered that at mile marker 18 on I-15 in Arizona, there was a space where I'd often seen fellow drivers resting. Without thinking twice, I drove there. I was so tired that I fell asleep the moment I parked my truck. I think about 15 minutes passed when I heard knocking on the passenger side window. I opened my eyes, unsure if I'd already fallen asleep and dreamed it, or if I had actually heard it. I ignored it and tried to rest again. But then, again, and louder this time, someone knocked on the window. I got up, thinking it might be one of the 4 other truckers parked nearby who needed help. But to my surprise, when I stepped outside, there was absolutely no one there. I chalked it up to exhaustion making me hear things, so I lay back down. Not even a minute later, I heard a loud bang on the trailer. I thought someone was trying to steal my cargo, so I grabbed the baseball bat I always keep with me and my headlamp, then walked around the truck. There was nothing, no one. I checked the lock I usually keep on the trailer doors, and it was still secure. I stood there, wondering what was going on, when suddenly, I clearly felt someone blow slowly into my ear. My skin crawled. There was no one near me. I've always been a religious person, so without a second thought, I ran back into the cab of the truck, terrified. I considered getting out again to ask the other drivers if they'd seen or heard anything, but I was too scared, so I decided to lie back down and ignore it. Then, another bang, this time on the driver's side. I got up, cursing, ready to confront whoever was messing with me. That's when I saw it. It was a woman in a wedding dress. I couldn't see her face. Her head was covered with a bridal veil. I don't even know how I managed it, but I started the truck and sped away. I swear, when I looked in the mirror, I could see her floating about 3 feet above the ground. I didn't stick around to find out what would happen next. I drove straight to Las Vegas, where I was finally able to rest for a while. I've never stopped at that exit again. A few days later, I spoke with an older man who told me I wasn't the only driver who had experienced something like that. There were others with similar stories. Never ignore the things you think you're dreaming about. They might be the most real thing you'll ever experience.